Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 26th of February. Thanks for joining us again. And remember, you can always get your latest weather information easily on the phone. The Alaska Weather Information Line is there for you 24 hours a day. A toll-free call in Alaska at 1-800-472-0391. You can find our information online at weather.gov/Alaska, and if you can't find what you're looking for, please let me know. I'm always happy to serve you any way I possibly can, and if you need help finding some climate information, you're looking for ice thickness information out of the interior, you want to find your aviation weather forecast, or you just need a forecast for your part of Alaska, I'm happy to help. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me, and it might take me a day or so to get back to you, but I will get back to you. I love to talk to folks out in real Alaska. Let's get to it. As we check in on northern parts of Southeast tonight, we still got a little bit of red on the map. That is a winter storm warning. That'll go until 6 o'clock on Thursday now. For many of you in the Haines area, conditions should be improving if they haven't already. It looks like as we head into the overnight hours, generally above 1,000 feet, you could see anywhere from about 4 to 12 inches of additional snow, again above Skagway on the White Pass area. And generally it looks like conditions are going to stay ripe for more snow to fall in kind of heavy fashion during that time frame. But as we get into tomorrow morning, conditions should start to improve and the snow intensity will taper off. So when you wake up tomorrow, things should be getting better, but you may still have a lot to shovel out there, especially if you're up above 1,000 feet there. For central and southern parts of Southeast, generally rain looks like for most areas. We're not really concerned about any significant snow coming your way, with low pressure still lurking out here across the northern Gulf. You can see that on the satellite picture this afternoon, and pardon the lines, it's that time of the year when we see some interruptions in our satellite signal. But low pressure is lurking right about here. We've got a lot of leftovers from an old front kind of hovering right here across Southeast. We've got another system down here across the southern Gulf, and yet another wave of low pressure here across the central and western parts of the Bering Sea and the North Pacific. Most of the interior right now under the effects of high pressure that's sitting up here across the North Slope, pushing in that northerly dry air, pulling in cold, dry continental air from Canada at this point. So really not a whole lot happening there except for some very stable air across the interior and around the Tanana Valley. That means Fairbanks and North Pole are both under stage 1 and 2 air quality alerts. Let me get that the right way. North Pole 2, Fairbanks 1, I believe, from the Division of Environmental Conservation from the state. So again, mind those alert stages there in the middle Tanana Valley as we go. And across Southeast, we continue to see clouds pushing in from the coast with that southwesterly flow that's going to stay with us. When we get to the aviation maps here in just a minute, you'll see that broad south and westerly flow is actually a little bit stronger today across the eastern Gulf there. So that's keeping a lot of that moisture feeding right into the higher train of Southeast right now. But not a lot doing here across the interior or the west coast. This is all an offshore flow feeding into low pressure here in the west. If you look very carefully, it's kind of a hazy, shady area here south of St. Lawrence Island, south of St. Matthew, and that is the ice edge. And we know a lot of our family and friends are out here across the northern Bering right now. The ice is on the move, and with area of low pressure working northward, some parts of that will be drifting southward, but the eastern areas east of St. Paul probably we'll see that edge move northward just a little bit as we get into some southerly warmer air on the eastern side of that system here. So we'll put the map on and you can see where things are right now. This is the system I'm talking about here across the Bering, a 987 millibar low. This warm air is trying to lift northward, but it's going to end up heading just north and east, it looks like, of St. Paul, right about here. So as this low pressure system tracks northeast, on the back side of that, of course, we're going to get into that northerly flow, and that may allow that ice edge to move a little bit further south. Big question mark, though, right now between St. Paul and where the ice edge is currently located. This area right here, guess where all the crab folks are? Yep. That area here is a place to watch. We'll see how far south that ice edge comes, but in the next couple days, it could be on the move a little bit. So if you're watching the show and you're watching the ice, that's where you want to keep your eye on right there for the next couple days. Low pressure across the northern Gulf is at 989 millibars. That onshore flow again giving us a kind of a wet weather day across most of Southeast. The purple front here, the occlusion, is falling apart. That's going away. The stationary boundary is still trying to hang on just by its last leg there, it looks like. And we have some pockets of snow, generally light around parts of the Kenai Peninsula, up around the Alaska Range, around southwest near Dillingham, and also across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region. Nothing very widespread at all. High pressure shifting north and east tonight into northern parts of the Yukon, 1,022 millibars there. As that moves southward, this low pressure system is going to intensify a little bit more. 995 millibar low. You'll notice the pressure pattern, easy for me to say, kind of packs in a little bit tighter there, and that means the winds could come up a little bit more, probably looking at least some gales around parts of southeast, but nothing too strong just yet. Out across the west around Cook Inlet, northerly winds will start to pick up around the inlet region. We're looking at snow showers on the backside of the system. Most of that is going to be over Kodiak Island, not so much for the Kenai Peninsula or Cook Inlet. Out across the west, still unsettled, still looking at no major shift in the weather out across the Bering. We remain unsettled with most of the cloud cover just north of St. Paul to the ice edge, and north of that, generally clear and dry. High pressure sits across the Yukon at 1,023 millibars there, right across the Arctic coast, and the unsettled weather hovers in the same old place from northern parts of southeast to the northern Gulf at around 1,005 millibars. We'll keep snow showers over Prince William Sound, but generally east of Whittier and all the way out toward Cordova and Yakutat into McCarthy. Across the central and northern parts of the interior, a pretty good chance you're going to have a generally VFR kind of day out there with maybe a little bit of low clouds in the morning and some fog perhaps. High pressure sitting out there on Friday. It moves south over the Yukon, 1,026 millibars. We keep our unsettled weather in the same place across the northern Gulf. The pressure centers don't change very much. Snow showers on the northern side of this and into the higher train of southeast. Probably a wintry mix around Juneau all the way out toward Cross Sound. South of that, it definitely looks like rain showers. Still warm there. But then we add in a new weather player, and that's this 972 millibar low that comes in across the western chain, watching for snow and rain showers to quickly pass into the central and western chain there as we get into Friday afternoon. And that's when those southerly winds start to pick up a little bit. But remember, this area of low pressure is going to be moving north and east, it looks like. And so we're going to be watching areas here north and west of St. Paul to the ice edge for maybe some southerly movement of that ice there. So again, some big question marks. We'll talk about that with the updated ice map coming up here in just a few minutes. Let's take a look at temperatures in the morning. It's been a cold day across the interior, and as we head into tonight, look for those lows to drop into the 25 to 35 degree below range from Ambler to Bettles all the way down toward the middle Tanana Valley. Fairbanks looking at 23 below, Arctic Village 33 below, 35 to 45 below across the North Slope. And again, that is not counting on the wind chill. We're not quite into wind chill advisory or warning territory with numbers like this just yet, but we're close. So again, just take extra precaution if you got to go outside in weather like this. A little bit of wind makes that worse. 4 below around Nome tonight, around Sandpoint, 23 above, 33 above for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 20 for St. Paul. And as we look at the capital city tomorrow, just about 40 degrees, a better chance of hitting that mark and even above from Sitka to Wrangell and Petersburg all the way down toward Ketchikan and Annette. 20s looks like the pattern for Kenai Peninsula tomorrow, about 32 in Whittier, 37 in Kodiak. Teens for Dillingham and King Salmon. Bethel, you're looking at 3. Grayling, about 6. Galena, about 4 below. Nome, 8 above. And about 10 below for places around Kotzebue. The North Slope, we expect to see temps anywhere from about 25 to 35 below. And again, that is not factoring in the wind chill. So make sure you're using extra care if you're going outside.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your aviation weather now. It looks like the main core of weather and kind of unsettled areas will be across the Gulf and all the way across the southern sections of the Bering Sea. Everything north of the Alaska Range and really north of Bethel should be generally VFR, safe for some hit and miss patchy fog from time to time, or maybe a brief round of blowing snow. We are going to see a little bit of marginal areas up across the Beaufort Seacoast, east of Point Barrow, all the way out toward just north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, but again, primarily areas across the northern sections of the Panhandle and the northern Gulf. We'll be looking at IFR through the rest of the week. You'll also see lingering areas here surrounding low pressure and in the vicinity of a front around Kodiak Island and also stretching out in the vicinity of the Pribilofs and points southward as we start up tomorrow morning. Notice as we get into the afternoon, IFR conditions also up and down the interior of southeast into the central Gulf, also across the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern Aleutians up towards St. Paul and St. George, and then wrapping around low pressure out here in the west. The interior, the west coast, the North Slope, all look pretty good for Thursday afternoon. As we get into Friday, we're still looking at that slosh of moisture moving into the central and northern parts of southeast. Marginal conditions extend westward into Cook Inlet, all the way over the Kenai Peninsula and hit and miss across Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island. Out across the west, IFR filling in again across the entirety of the Aleutian chain. and into the Alaska Peninsula. And then we start to see marginal conditions setting in across the interior with a little bit of IFR up around the middle Yukon Valley, north and west. Off the Chukchi coast, IFR conditions will be approaching. That kind of swings across the north slope, but most of the interior for Friday afternoon looks pretty good. You'll see improving conditions here across southeast. A little bit of IFR stretching up around the capital city and some of the higher terrain there, but most areas, if you have any visibility restrictions, it'll be mainly marginal. IFR, though, sits right over Yakutat. Across south central, southwest, primarily VFR, including Kodiak, but look at Bristol Bay, starting to fill in a little bit more around the southwestern capes with MVFR, and then IFR conditions continue out in the west from St. Paul to St. George and southward toward the Aleutians. Here's your pass conditions in detail now for your Thursday. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule as we go throughout your day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass push over toward marginal conditions as we get into Thursday. Rainy Pass looking at generally VFR conditions as we go. Windy Pass looking at VFR throughout the day. As we move a little bit further eastward in the Alaska Range, though, marginal conditions are expected. We'll see that for Mentasta Pass, south toward Tanita Pass developing throughout the afternoon, and Portage Pass leans over toward marginal conditions mainly on the eastern side as we get into your Thursday. Chilkoot and White Pass at this time are expected to be instrument flight rule throughout the day. Your freezing levels indicate that the warmest area we have right now is across central and southern parts of southeast. You'll have to get south of Port Alexander and probably Ketchikan and Metlakatla to get into the 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing level range there. Everything south of that, of course, warmer, but to the north and west, looks like everything's going to be at least sub-freezing again for Thursday morning. No surprise there given the season. Icing potential is somewhat limited, generally above 3,000 to about 4,000 feet across the Gulf, maybe below 6,000 feet across northern parts of southeast and into the south and western sections of the Yukon, below 9,000 feet for the entire area though. And out across the central and southern parts of the Bering, below 8,000 feet, but also above 3 for the central and eastern chain. The jet stream right now has a fast-moving river of air cutting across the North Pacific. Wind speeds there 130 to 150 knots, with low pressure sitting across the northern Gulf. The Arctic jet coming in across the Bering Strait, showing 50 to 85 knots. And it looks like as we get into Friday and Saturday, these two ribbons of moisture and storm energy may combine. That'll probably bring a significant weather wave through our region Friday into about Sunday morning. In that time frame there, as those two patterns kind of converge a little bit. As we get into Thursday, it looks like low pressure will still be sitting across the Alcan border. A broad west and southwesterly flow coming into southeast at 30 to 50 knots. North and westerlies cutting into the Chukchi coast. Lighter winds from the west across the north slope. And out across the west, you can see things still kind of forming and coming together. A weak area of high pressure sits just south of the Pribilofs, and a west and southwesterly flow 15 to 20 coming into the central chain. It's a little stronger at 3,000 feet with winds up to 50 knots there. We're still looking at generally light winds across the north slope, generally from the west, but light winds are cutting in from the east up the Yukon Valley, wrapping around low pressure here. They're much stronger over Kodiak and also across southeast, where wind speeds there coming off the water at 35 to 50 knots. Turbulence is limited at this time, generally to southeast, and probably below about 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Some light chop all the way through the inside passage, but it looks like generally south of Angoon all the way to Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, and Annette, below 6,000 feet for some light turbulence.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We project that by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track three aerosols, dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice edge here. We're going to watch for some changes with area from St. Paul out to around St. Matthew. This area here, as we go ahead in time by Friday night and into Saturday, we could be looking at more of a northeasterly to northerly flow developing, which will start to push some of those strips of ice out of that marginal ice zone shaded in blue and send those a little bit further southward. On the other side of St. Paul, though, we're looking at more of a south and southwesterly wind that could move that ice edge a little bit further north. We know a lot of our family and friends are out here working this part of the sea right now, so be careful. And if you're communicating to them and giving them some information about the sea ice edge, tell them that we're watching this, and they should be too as we get into Friday and Saturday. You can get the latest information anytime you want, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, and give them a call. The Alaska Sea Ice Program loves to help folks out when they're out at sea and watching the sea ice edge. Let's take a look at Thursday in southeast. Some gusty winds there around Stevens Passage, gusts of 40 knots or so, with 25 knots sustained, 5-foot seas on the inside. Looking from Cross Sound all the way down to the Dixon entrance, 25 to 35 knots sustained, about 15 to 19-foot seas there on Thursday. That should be the worst of it, though. As we get into Friday, conditions improve, seas come down. You're still looking at an onshore flow for most areas, all the way down to Port Alexander, and then it becomes a little more northwesterly around Craig and Klawock. On the inside passage, also looking at light northerly winds, 10 knots and 7-foot seas, and southeasterlies remain a little bit breezy there, all the way from Stevens Passage to the Lynn Canal, 10 to 20, with 2 to 4-foot seas expected. For Thursday in south central, northerlies inside of Prince William Sound, a 10-knot, 2-foot sea expected there. Northerlies light over the ice in Cook Inlet, 15 knots south of Kenai to Callaghan Island, and then northwesterlies pick up across the Barrens as they always do, pulling into that area of low pressure here. West and northeasterly winds across northern parts of the Cook Inlet region. You're generally looking at all this flowing into that low pressure center, though. 10 knots at most outside of Hitchenbrook entrance. That comes down a little bit as you head westward. As you look at Friday, no big changes there. Still light winds, small seas inside of Prince William Sound. Northwesterlies still going strong there across the Barrens. Not for the Barrens, though. That's pretty normal. 8 to 10-foot seas there. And northerlies inside of Cook Inlet, and looking at perhaps some gusty winds channeled right out of Resurrection Bay, 20 knots and 9-foot seas as we get into Friday across the northern Gulf. For the west coast and southwest around Shelikof Strait, let's check there first. 20 knots from the west with a 5-foot sea. A little bit stronger on the eastern side, 25 knots and 10-foot sea. Southwesterlies coming up. The Pacific coast, light easterlies over the ice around Bristol Bay and 3-foot seas down the coast there in the open water. For Friday, not much of a change. Winds come up a little bit more to the south and east, north and west of Cold Bay, 15 knots, 2-foot seas. Look for westerlies to come down a little bit in Shelikof Strait as well. 4-foot seas on the inside, 9-foot seas across the western Gulf and near Kodiak, and you're looking at 9 to 11-foot seas heading down the Pacific coast. For the Aleutians, Thursday looks like a nice day. Westerlies 10 to 15 knots. Most areas looking at small seas, 4 to 6 feet, 9 to 10-foot seas in the west, and anywhere from 13 to 14-foot seas on the Pacific waters. So let's flash forward into Friday, and wow, look at this big change. Northerlies coming out of the North Pacific there. A strong easterly gale starts to develop here, and we're looking at about 40 knots from anywhere west of Nikolsky all the way out to Shemya. Southeasterlies a little lighter from Nikolsky to Unalaska, 4 to 11-foot seas there, but 12, 13, 14-foot seas out in the west. It'll probably get worse on Saturday, as the low hasn't quite made it to the chain yet. And we're watching for that low to affect the ice around St. Paul and north and west again. So that's the area we're talking about. And already on Thursday, we're talking about a north and easterly wind pushing that ice edge just a little bit more to the south. And you can see it's still northeasterly around St. Paul and St. George with a 5 to 6-foot sea in the open water there. But as we get into Friday, that becomes easterly around the St. Matthew Island waters with 5-foot seas, southeasterlies around St. Paul and St. George. But this is going to come around there as we get into Friday night and Saturday as that low pressure system gets closer and closer to the Pribilof. So once again, if you're chatting with your friends and your family out here between St. Paul and St. Matthew Island waters, they're probably very close to the marginal ice zone. That may move a little bit further southward in the Friday to Saturday, Sunday time frame. So again, give them that pointer, give them the phone number to the Alaska Sea Ice Program, and they're happy to help you out and give ice positions. Across the Beaufort Seacoast, a south and southwesterly flow continues, 10 to 15 knots there. Light winds across the Chukchi coast as well, generally 10 knots in a variable direction. As we get into Friday, no big changes there except for the Chukchi coast, where we get that southwesterly flow back coming in at 20 knots, 15 knots across the Beaufort. Recapping tonight's weather, low pressure continues across the region, mainly in the northern Gulf, working with cold high pressure, keeping things clear and dry across the interior. Unsettled for the southern Bering Sea, but most of the big weather activity will happen in the northern Gulf. That continues into Saturday until we turn our heads to the west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go fly. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.